welcome back to Therapeutic Madness. We were just on a break getting mad as hell. And so if that lands in there, you'll find out it was very funny. And if it doesn't, I guess you'll never know. So welcome back to Justin and Demetri.
Hello. You're back.
Welcome back. Justin, will you stand up and dance for us?
Nope.
Fuck that. Justin will dance on some podcast eventually.
Yeah, when we do the medicated podcast.
We will do a medicated podcast. It's going to be awesome. Demetri, will you be joining us on the medicated podcast?
Send me the invite. I'll be there.
Boom! Demetri's the best. He's so down. He's like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, he's super chill that way. So on our last episode, which was part 2 of our 3-part series on psychedelic sciences, I wouldn't say it's Psychedelics 101. Now we're in what, Psychedelics 1320? Is that what you called it, Justin?
1320. Yep.
So Justin and Demetri, you have to know this about them. Like both of them are, you know, like here I am in psychedelics, right? And then in psychedelic science nonetheless. And I'm the only one here that's a licensed therapist. Here I am. Here these two fuckers are way up here, way off the screen. You can't even see them.
Demetri is way higher than I am.
And Demetri, I was telling him on a break earlier, I was like, Demetri uses words that like, I'm like, Chris, hurry and look that up, you know, so that I can know what he's saying, you know, like he has such an extensive vocabulary. It's mind blowing. So we had finished the last episode with talking a little bit about microdosing and macrodosing. And so I kind of want to wrap that up. Like we talked a bit about what people would be trying to get from microdosing, but, and we talked just a smidgen about what people may be trying to gain from macrodosing. I've said already a few times, like, I don't even microdose. Like, I may take something like a gram when I'm doing some fun, usually outdoor activity that I just want a little bit of enhancement with, you know, where I'm not like shrooming balls or something. But macrodosing is how I prefer to take psychedelics because I do like the trip. I do like the effect. I do like the things that come with psychedelics, and that's just me.
Yeah.
There is no right or wrong way. The universe told me so. And but I know what I'm searching for. There's lots of things that I get out of a macrodosing trip. So you guys tell me what your thoughts are on this stuff.
So personally, I like to be sub-hallucinatory. And I enjoy, you know, like just being on the cusp of getting that nice glimmer, that sparkling feeling, very euphoric, and being outside and doing physical activities. That's kind of where my happy home is now. I was in a phase where it was the only time that I would do it was when I was going heavier use and really trying to see how far I could go. And I've been
I already know how far I can go.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to discuss that.
So I do like to be kind of in a range where, you know, I'm just on the border of kind of this. I'm like stepping in the spiritual realm, and I have one foot over in the physical realm, and I'm like riding that bridge. I think that's kind of where I like to be personally. But I've been.
Is it an all or nothing thing, Justin? Do you always like to be in that place, or is it different depending on where you are? Like,
I think that's like pretty much if I'm doing it, that's kind of where I like to be. But
interesting. For me, it's very different. It depends on what I'm doing. Like sometimes I might take a smaller dose, and I prefer macro doses usually overall, but I take those same, you know, Justin and I may have been out of state before and done it somewhere, but you never know.
we definitely weren't in Utah.
Yeah, we were not in Utah, but like, yeah. So sometimes outdoor, I agree with you. I like outdoor fun activities where you're like, you know, balls to the wall. But I think for each person, it's individual how they like to do it.
Yeah.
And I think some people have a little range, but I know some people, like I said, who have only microdosed, have never done anything different. So I was just wondering if that's the case for you, if you like that one certain way, and that's usually just how you do it. Demetri, what about you?
It varies. I mean, just due to the work that I do, you know, I mean, like when I do retreats and when I work with people, I'm right there with them, same level. Like if somebody drinks a third cup of ayahuasca, I'm drinking a third cup of ayahuasca with them. You know,
you are?
Yeah, to be on the same level with them.
I actually love that because I was thinking earlier like in our last episode, you know, which was just earlier today, friends, but
Yeah, we're
I
not
was
wearing the same
thinking
clothes
about that,
weeks apart.
how I like people to be in the same place as me. You know, I like to experience I like psychedelic experiences with people, not beside people. You know what I mean? Does
Harmony,
that make sense?
you know, in a very basic manner. I think that's harmony.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what I'm doing, you know, like, I definitely work with microdoses. I definitely work with macrodoses. Like, if there are, you know, aspects of my psyche that I need to have, you know, surgical precision with, I go a little bit deeper, you know, and like, I feel that the way that these medicines work, like consciously and psychologically, I mean, time can be altered and dilated. There can be a lot of work that happens in 1 hour, psychologically, therapeutically. You know, on a microdose level, you know, I work with psilocybin, you know, as a basic additive to a neurotropic stack that I work with, that I've kind of gone through and perfected for my own body, and for several other people that I've introduced it to. They like it has replaced Adderall for them.
Yeah.
Like, in the sense of like getting away from these, you know, stimulants or like, you know, pharmaceuticals, you know. And so like, and it's all plant based, the neurotropic stack that I've added it to. And so,
Demetri, we need to swap stacks.
I'd love that. Yeah, I mean, I have one ready for you. I'd love to just gift it to you.
Nice.
You know,
We'll
and
edit
so
that
like,
out as well.
yeah,
What?
There
but
are
so,
no
like,
stacks anywhere
it
anyway.
just like, it just depends. I mean, different uses, different strokes for different folks, you know, like, I think as the saying goes. I've
I'm
found
gonna keep the stroke jokes to a minimum.
a lot of use out of macro dosing, you know, like, the initial push off into the ocean of chaos that is the journey of life. I think it requires, you know, like a heroic dose. And that is to apprehend the self in your own storm, to continue the metaphor, and to be able to.
God, you made me all excited to like just head out into the woods somewhere, Demetri. Jeez.
Well, I mean, like, and that's
Right.
that's kind of the
Leaving on
point.
a
Is that
journey as we speak. Like,
some people, you know, they like, and this is what the I guess spiritualist would call like, or say, is that the medicine is calling you, you know,
yeah.
like, to go deeper, to experience more of yourself, you know. And the deeper that I've gone with these medicines, the more that I have recognized the unity, like the fact that we are all one, and that there is
Yeah.
no separation between us. And that exploration of the self then becomes the seeking of the seeker.
See, and
In,
I love that. Like,
in
that's why I love psychedelics. Like, I've always loved psychedelics since the very first time I used them. And I've loved every experience I've had with psychedelics. And that is why.
yeah,
It's
we're
that unity, it's that calling, it's that oneness, it's the experience that you have with psychedelics, with the universe, with the people around you. I love that. It's such a
yeah,
totally different level.
yeah.
And not like in a like, oh, I was so fucked up kind of way. It's
There's a
like
lot of science behind it
not
also.
that.
I mean, if you look at like the morphogenetic field, and you know, some of these consciousness streams that in play, in some of these, you know, sciences, that a lot of people just don't see or recognize or pay attention to, you know, like like the 100 monkey syndrome or whatever it was, where they took the scientists took a monkey off I think the Galapagos Islands or something like that, and taught him how to break nuts open with a rock, and then
Oh,
the you know, taught him how to feed himself more efficiently, and then dropped him back off at home, and figured out that these monkeys that were back on the island had already learned the method of breaking open the nuts. And this is the sense of the morphogenetic field, in the sense that consciousness is relayed between species, like, or within the same species, so that, you know, if one person recognizes, you know, something, then all beings or something within that species recognize that same thing on some level or some frequency. And you know, harmony, being able to experience these
interesting.
types of things with our tribe and our community, is such a powerful thing. Bonding, you know, like
Yeah.
of being able to experience true, honest community,
Yeah. And connection.
yeah,
As a person who treats addiction, we talk all the time about how connection is actually the opposite of addiction, not sobriety.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
100%. A lot of
And
people,
it is the thing in Maslow's hierarchy of need. It's the most important thing we need to have. And we know that, like, in the field of psychology, social work, therapy, we've known for decades that human connection is the most important thing for human beings.
I will say this with that I feel like in some of my times where my wilder times, there was an element of connection even in those negative behaviors, right? You find people who are aligned to the behaviors that you want to engage in, whether they're positive or negative.
Or they just love you regardless of where you are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so there can be connection even in addiction, right?
Yeah, there's tons of connection. Like, that's one of the things is, like, people love us that, you know, like, there's this place where there's not this judgment, and, like, other people get our pain. Whether people accept that or not, like, common perils bring us together. Somebody,
if you guys don't accept
that is how therapy works. It's like when somebody says, I understand, I know what that feels like, I felt it too. You know, there's this huge, powerful healing in that, you know?
Yeah, it validates the struggles that other people are going through. You say, I hear you, and I recognize, you know, what you're talking about. That's very powerful for people.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? Let's talk about, okay, so I know you guys are like, these two like chomp at the bit to talk about like super deep stuff. And I'm like, hey, well, if you could like get the rest of us even halfway to where you guys are, then you guys could get crazy talking about your theories and all the shamanistic stuff, which just so amazing and interesting. And like, actually psychedelic sciences, there's so much to it. And like, there's this one researcher, and he does holotropic breath work, and he does psychedelic sciences. His name is Stan Graff, and he is like, man, some of the therapeutic stuff he talks about with birthing trauma and past life trauma and all this kind of stuff. And it's crazy. And we'll get into that in a whole nother episode, because that's like a whole nother thing. But like, there's so much in this stuff. So I want to let these two kind of get crazy, because they are so much more informed on it than I could ever be. So I'm just going to kind of sit back and, of course, crack jokes every now and again, so that we don't lose the madness in the fucking episode, because these two will dry it up like toast. So, so you guys, like, where do you guys want to start with?
I would love to talk about
micro and macro dosing.
Yeah, I would love to talk about stoned ape theory in general, because I think
I love apes.
When we talk about, I think when we talk about, you know, our journey into psychedelics, how is it that us as ancient races, I mean, they found psilocybin in like fires and hearths and different cookware 8,000 years in the past, right? They've carbon dated these items. And so you start talking about, you know, there's this underlying theory by certain people in the psychedelic community, and the thought is that language, projection of your imagination, art, drawing, like the rock art, philosophy, all of these things kind of came from an awakening experience from an animal mind into, I guess, what we would call a human mind, right? And that theory is called the stoned ape theory, and it's based on the thought that the influence of psilocybin and other psychedelics had this leapfrog effect on the evolution of our minds. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, Demetri.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The stoned ape theory, man, just in general, like Terence McKenna, God rest his soul in paradise. Like, and it was actually just I think the third was the anniversary of his passing. Yeah, man, he's a true like revolutionary in his thinking and his concepts and his ability to portray glossolalia, and, you know, create just these entire landscapes for people to explore through his vocabulary. It was incredibly profound, you know, and one of the theories that he kind of capitulated with was the stoned ape theory, being that, you know, that as the great apes you know, began foraging within their own selves, with their space, within the jungles. And they ran out of food, they would start to venture onward into the plains. And as they would venture out into the plains, they would run into most likely the first form of food that they'd find is, you know, fungi that are growing on dung of either cows or other you know, grass-eating animals. And this theory, stoned ape theory, was, you know, relative to the extent that of being that, you know, we as apes evolved because of the psilocybin mushroom, that it introduced a certain aspect of beingness into the species that is the ape. To grow the prefrontal cortex, to have an imagination, to be able to create future projections, and generally kind of just apprehend the self in the moment, out of an instinctual pattern that is more like to an animal. And so, you know, this idea that is the stoned ape theory, I think it has a lot more that's behind it, and just the direction that it kind of, the not even just direction, but the foundation that it creates for people to be able to kind of situate themselves on the playing field that are psychedelics, is it's imperative, because what psychedelics do, I feel, are they create the evolutionary catalyst within the being. It introduces us to the catalyst of life, and being able to apprehend ourselves in the moment, I feel like, and that's crucial to any kind of evolutionary, you know, just in general, from a biological standpoint, looking at ecosystems, the way that, you know, biology and symbiosis emerges out of, you know, synergy or entropy, and the general emergence that happens there. This is nature at work, and we are part of nature. And in that aspect, this is something that Terence McKenna and his brother Dennis have both been very vocal about throughout the years, along with many other individuals in the community who have come to this same kind of general understanding, because nobody knows for certain. You know, nobody really knows for certain how we got here. But I think it's important. There was a meme that I created several years ago, which is actually funny that it comes up now. But like, one of the initial photos that was taken of an Amazonian shaman is, you know, he's sitting here blown out of his gourd. I don't know if you guys have seen the photo, but how are we to understand, you know, the end if we don't understand the beginning? And this kind of motif is you know, I think crucial to kind of creating a position for ourselves as a species, and apprehending ourselves as a species, because with this stoned ape theory, we have the transition from being, you know, somewhat like, I mean, definitely community-based organisms and, you know, animals or mammals, but to creating and extending that hierarchy into something that's more complex, you know, what we experience today in the general intelligence of our beingness as being human beings or Homo sapien. And so in this instance, I think that there's a general kind of like feel or ambiance that's happening within the community that we get to kind of, you know, speak amongst ourselves and say, hey, like, where are we going as a species, and what are we doing, and why are we doing it, you know? And that I think is a great foundation, the stoned ape theory, to be able to say, you know, and to see and recognize the changeover effect as they have in like cinematography and film work, you know, changing from one scene to the next, and being able to, you know, swing from one branch to the other, you know, to use different metaphors.
Like when in The Wizard of Oz, it goes from black and white to color.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and
Dude, who doesn't love the Wizard of Oz?
for real, you know,
Dark
and
Side of the Moon.
so it's one of those things that, you know, these theories that you know, founders and pioneers like Terence McKenna and his brother Dennis created just in their own journeys. They began, you know, of course, looking at Maria Sabina and the Oaxacan elders and you know, Aztec Mayans that used like Teotihuacan, or however you want to pronounce it, the flesh of the gods, as being a sacrament. And extended that into being, you know, more ritualistic, and then recognizing the profundity of, you know, say like the cow in Hindu and Vedic, you know, philosophies, and trying to grasp this, you know, these palpable materials as far as how we got to being where we are as a species, and where we're going, I think is the conversation at hand when we discuss stoned ape theory. Because stoned ape theory is that evolutionary break from nature into directed consciousness, such as ourselves, as Homo sapien, being the cosmos exploring itself, you know, the eye within the eye within the eye, looking at itself constantly. Does that, you know, do you kind of get a general feel for what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, when we talk about, you know, some of the initial psychedelic, you know, appetite waiting for guys like Terence McKenna, you know, back in the 60s, there was a big movement around Tibetan monks and Buddhism, and actually in Tibet, there, you know, is a historical use for psychedelics as well.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me that, you know, there are these cultures that are separated by thousands of miles, technologically, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, but had similar symbology, similar psychedelic experiences, even with different compounds. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the conversation even continues to extend further on beyond that, because, you know, when we look at the civilizations, it's important to kind of comprehend the how to say this, the disintegration that has taken place. You know, look at Graham Hancock's work.
Yeah, Graham
Hancock is single-handedly destroying everybody's, well, not everybody's, but those that, you know, that pertain to, say, the church or Vatican, like Catholic or Catholicism dogmas or those types of things. He is destroying those paradigms with actual science. And it's incredible to see things like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and in Hungary, and these massive civilizations that are being uncovered and unearthed, and being also able to discover, you know, relics that are embedded in these civilizations that pertain to psychedelics, or that have some sort of implication of use of these medicines for whatever it has been for. And I think that, you know, just to take the personal standpoint, is that they are evolutionary items. They introduce the catalyst of life to us so that we as a species are able to apprehend it, and then begin to direct it and become masters of our own destiny, creators of our own reality. You know, and that's the cosmovision that gets brought in from the Amazonian shamans.
Well, and this is where we jump off the face of the cliff, folks. So hold on. This leads right into where we talk about, you know, in my opinion, and I've had several experiences where I've been somewhere different, and there are energies, or, you know, people, whatever it is that you want to call it, there's entities that are waiting to communicate. And I've heard other people's theories, and I've often ruminated on this myself, is if I wanted to find a way to facilitate a subspecies, like maybe humans, maybe there's an advanced race or advanced you know, planet somewhere, and they find a planet of semi-intelligent apes, and I want to be able to communicate with them on this very high level frequency, or in a safe space that's out of the physical realm, how would I do that? And so we start talking about ancient civilizations that somehow had this magic recipe for things like ayahuasca, had access to things like the toad, and thinking like, what critical thought path would lead you to say, I'm going to peel the bark off of this thing and I'm going to cook it with this, this other plant compound, and it's going to be the exact ratio that I need to go on the spirit journey and talk to the elders.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're
to then
getting,
create entire civilizations. Like on that point, have you guys ever been to Chichen Itza?
oh yeah, that's where I got this written from.
Dude,
Yeah.
that shit's a trip. And if you've ever had somebody down there that takes you and shows you all the amazing weird things that Chichen Itza does, like there's shit with the sun, there's stuff about snakes moving, there's like certain sounds that like echo, and like you can know, I mean, it's some crazy ass shit.
Well, like what I think what's really interesting here also is the use of the pyramids and what they were used for. Okay, and this is a highly argued point or debated point as far as the reasons for them being even in existence. My understanding and resonation with this thread of consciousness is that that they are balancing structures for the earth, because there is so much energy that is happening on this sphere that is rotating and spinning on its own axis, that energetically there has to be balancing points. It's like your weights on a tire, in a methodical kind of aspect or relationship, but also looking at it in a deeper energetic sense. These pyramids were used for initiation. They were used for the purpose of being able to heal the body, and to create a certain understanding of the geometry, if you will, that has an effect on the human body based upon the sciences and the angles and the dimensions that are created with the mathematics and the geometries that are presented within these actual pyramids. You look at the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber on in the pyramids of Giza, and they have different resonations, different frequencies, and it was did we lose Justin?
We lost Justin.
I'm still here.
We lost your face. Now you're just JA, which stands for jackass. Oh, there you are. Welcome back, jackass.
It's such an amazing concept, what we're looking at here, because the way that these cultures were created were through offshoots, if you will, of a unified culture that I truly feel was in existence on this planet at some point. And there are rumors or stories or myths about there being different islands for different people and different energies and different
Anunnaki.
The Anunnaki, and the way that they all disintegrated in the tribes, the way that they split. It's an interesting story, but that's what it is it's a story, and it's based upon, I think, what most of us resonate within, and how we acquiesce to our own truth and what truly actually resonates within us, and being able to see some of these temples or pyramids as being structures that were used for purposes of initiation. There are written records for using certain plants in the burial of these pharaohs with the sarcophagi to bring them back to life in the afterworld. All kinds of purposes that were behind the spells and the magic, or whatever you want to call it, that's there. But looking at some of these theories for where we're going as a species, I think it's important to recognize that there's much more to these sciences, to quote you, Mindy, that meets the eye, and it dips into metaphysics, and it dips into things that are beyond, quote, provable physics. And it's something that that I feel that the people one day will stand up and recognize and see for themselves and within their own communities and be able to speak their own truth and say, this is the world and paradigm that I live within. And that is like, and that is something that matters, you know, in a sense of being able to understand where we're going as a species.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a massive rift that's happening today in the world, and you know, this coronavirus stuff, I think, is a pandemic that the earth is creating as a healing crisis to make all of us go within, so that we
and to heal itself. Have you seen what's happened to the pollution rates throughout the world?
phenomenal.
I dead ass serious think that the earth is trying to heal itself, and I know for sure, like for myself, like this has been the most healing time of my entire life. I've never had as many insights as I've had, not even with psychedelics, as I've had just during this coronavirus outbreak.
It's been a lot.
I'm with you on that.
It's been a lot, you know.
It has. And actually right there, we're going to pause really quick because we have to take a quick break, but we're going to come right back and talk about, like, so with these shifts, like, where are we going? And then that kind of leads us into as well, like, because you can't talk about substances, you can't talk about change in communities, change in society without talking about the policies that go with that.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break and we'll come right back and we'll talk some more about our psychedelic sciences. So welcome back to Therapeutic Madness, part 3 of our series on psychedelic sciences. We were actually just making some jokes about how the stuff that Demetri and Justin have jumped off the cliff into. We'll be talking about that in episodes 8 and 9. And so back to episode 3, we had to rein the guys in. You should hear, it's so fascinating though, the things they were talking about on the break, but we will get into those at some point. But we left off with like talking about how, you know, psychedelics, even, you know, back in ancestral populations and, you know, historic populations, there's been evidence of psychedelic use. We really don't have any explanation for why people were able to create the things that they've been able to create. And with all the technology we have today, you could go to any one of a number of places on this earth and see some of these amazing things, the pyramids, Chichen Itza, like the list is just very long of things that have just been built that are like mind-blowing. I mean, even Stonehenge, people are always like, how the hell did this happen? You know? So anyway, so, you know, we're talking a little bit about how psychedelics probably influence some of that and help move things along, but let's bring it into like now. And I was thinking, as you guys were talking about that, we can see the kind of shift that psychedelics bring about in societies and in a population of humans. If we just look at the 60s, which happened in, I mean, that was right before my lifetime, but we have lots of documented footage. I think Justin was alive in the 60s. Weren't you, old man?
That's right.
He's not drinking his coffee and can't even talk shit back.
That's right.
Anyway, back in the 60s when Justin was a kid,
I was 18.
you can see the impact of, you know, a lot of people then were taking psychedelics and indulging, and you can see the way that, you know, the world literally shifted during that time. It's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest shifts that happened in the 20th century. I would say it's the biggest, like, shift of consciousness. And I think that we're going toward that place now. Like, well, we're looking at, you know, we're seeing all these people who are willing to, like, they're willing to start discussing psychedelics. People are wanting to experiment with them. In the work that Demetri and I do together, as well as the work that Justin and I do together, I know for sure that there's this changing evolution of consciousness, you know, around psychedelics and around what they could bring to the world, what they can bring to individuals, what they can bring to communities. And we're also starting to see that reflected in policy. So go ahead, guys. What do you guys think about that?
Well, and I will say one thing. I have never seen a group of people who have taken medicine, spirit medicine together, you know, kind of the psychedelics, whatever, who have come out of that and been fractioned as a group. Yeah. I've always seen this medicine create an instant connection, foundational empathy. Like, wow, I'm human and that person's a human too, and we're both going through this experience, and it's so powerful. Yeah. You know, you find common ground there. And I think as a community, as we wake up to more of these substances, my hope is that those empathic connections will help bind us in a way that we can move our society forward. Because right now there's so much division, but there's two subcultures, right? There's this culture that feels very connected and vibey, and then there's this maybe older theoried culture of divisive, or your side's not as good as my side. That's always been, there's this tribal division, and then there's this tribal empathy, and I'd like to see us squeeze more on that tribal empathy as a group.
Well, we talked about that earlier, like the oneness that comes when you're utilizing psychedelics, like the way that your energy is just, you can feel it on such a higher level. You feel your connection to all human beings, to humanity, to making to the planet, to making the planet better. That's why I personally, I prefer to use psychedelics in an outdoor setting, where I can just be free and be at one with nature, because there is just that oneness. And I'm not sure that, anyway, I was just thinking, I'm not sure that I don't know personally of a way that can be achieved. I haven't achieved it myself any other way quite to that capacity. Like I said, I do know people who through meditation alone, I swear to God, have reached those kind of places, and through holotropic breath work, I'm not one of them. But I do think that it does create this oneness amongst us that moves us into a different place of love and understanding. And I say all the time, love is the answer. Love is the answer.
Yeah, let's look at flow states for a minute, okay? Psychedelics, I feel like also are an introduction into flow states. I hear the word empathy, and I hear flow state. I hear an ability to.
What do you mean by flow state?
So flow state is the ability to, generally come into the present moment of what's around you and whatever it is that you're doing. There's a book by Stephen Kotler, I believe is his name, and one other person, I forget his other, the other author's name. It's called Stealing Fire. Jamie Wheeler is his name. And this book, Stealing Fire, they go and they discuss flow states, and they also discuss the ancient soma, psychedelic soma drink that was ingested in ancient times, as well as what we kind of touched on briefly in the first episode of being, I think it was called the kakian, and this is or kaikian is what it is. It's a form of psychedelic brew that was reserved for ceremonial settings, and it was typically ingested in a communal community. There would be, I guess, just open energy exchange amongst everybody in a healthy communal sense. And so it was more readily accepted by the I guess the culture as not being stigmatized or being dogmatic or having complications with it, like it is or it has been viewed more recently in recent times. Psychedelics as a subject, and I think the more that we break that stigma through looking at these ritualistic uses that have been in use for thousands and thousands of years, looking at South American shamanism, looking at the word shaman actually comes from Eastern Siberia, and the language is from that geography. The words that more closely relate to South American magic or mestizo is the word taita. Taita translates to being like a father or like a priest. And these medicines, I feel like they have been used, and the way that they have been used has been destigmatized amongst these communities. And just up until more recent times have we kind of put the brakes on these things, like what you mentioned with the 60s and the revolutions that happened there. The government, they decided to put restrictions on these substances because they didn't understand them. They didn't understand the potential or the power that was behind them. And most of them, for instance, like LSD, LSD was looked at being weaponized,
and for people who don't know, and we might have shared this in the first episode, but LSD was actually introduced to U.S. people in the Army. Yeah. And they had them take it, and they thought that was going to make them they would follow orders and mind control all this stuff, and the exact opposite happened. Like people were
You
frying
can
balls, and they were
bury
like, "Fuck,
it.
Yeah, I mean, they
and
had,
that's how the whole thing in San Francisco had started. Timothy Leary was like, "Fuck this, I'm out of here with my LSD, and I'm gonna dose people."
Let's be careful though, because Timothy Leary jumped off the deep end, that man,
yeah, he
and
did.
completely created the stigma that we are now having to heal from in society, because he was such an astute individual within the community, quote unquote, and then literally drove his car off the edge.
Yeah.
And he even,
Which
you
what we
know,
were talking about earlier. Not all people,
you know,
people
he
should rein
recognized
it in.
that towards his later years, in his own ruminations and things. But like, you know, getting kind of back to the point that, you know, of this destigmatization and the movement that we're seeing currently in society, and people opening up more to these medicines, it's important, because it's going to be the way forward, I think, for our own evolutionary, you know, standpoint of being able to go within and alchemize the truth of our beings, and then come out better humans, you know, with more respect for the earth, for our environment, not polluting as much, you know, picking up after ourselves. And that's like, for instance, psilocybin has done nothing but connect me into the earth, and created such a strong, powerful connection to, and have respect for the earth, and to, you know, recognize it as a living organism, an entity. And, you know, these medicines, they introduce us to a new way of being, a new relationship with the earth, with our community, and with our peers. And this is why you see people like Silicon Valley associates and executives, you know, exploring plant medicines to critically problem solve the, you know, whatever problems it is that they're working on within their own institutions. And they are such versatile, you know, I mean, medicines.
Yeah.
They just have, you know, such an impact in a way of being able to introduce us to ourselves. And that unification factor, I think, even goes deeper into a consciousness factor, the ability to understand that if we are connected to everyone and everything, you know, dipping back also into the morphogenetic field, what we mentioned earlier in either in this episode or the last episode, these morphogenetic fields of consciousness and how we connect into them, we start to see the cause and effect that we have within our own environments, within our own communities, the ripple effect, and it broadens, you know, and can also get very specific. And these medicines assist us with apprehending those moments of excitation, and being able to come back into like a focused, you know, conscious awareness of how we are either celebrating our lives or mourning our lives, and healing, you know. And like you said, it always comes back down to love. That's been one of the most pertinent messages that I've also got from psychedelics, is that all of it's love.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
where do you, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mindy.
Well, where do you guys see us going with psychedelics from here? Like, where do you see? I mean, we've talked about a few times already on the show, like, you know, Oakland and Denver. Denver is, you know, Salt Lake City's cool older sister, you know, but they're like our cool cousin or some shit. And I wish we'd follow suit more often, but we don't. But both Oakland and Denver have decriminalized psilocybin, have decriminalized mushrooms. Like, so where do you guys see? What do you see the role being for psychedelics in society in these shifts we're talking about?
So
What are we already
I
seeing?
think, like, love, hate, I'm just gonna kind of put this out there, that, you know, what I see, there's some good and some bad with that. The good is that it opens up the topic to a broader audience, right? More people are talking about it because more people are hearing about it. More people are accepting the fact that it can be talked about without having to hush your tone, or being looked at like, you know, some lowlife. On the flip side of that, when you start seeing these guys from Silicon Valley who are taking it, you start seeing you know, these startups and pharmaceutical companies who are now looking at this medicine that was not just criminalized but demonized for, you know, 40, 50 years. And now all of a sudden these same companies are like, okay, there's money to be made here. There's patents I can file. There's obvious work that can be done in the brain with these compounds. And so that's a little bit of the fear that I have. So
Because not
You know,
everybody is pure of heart, for sure. And not everybody, like, that's one thing that I really love about Demetri and really respect about him is like Demetri have such a deep respect on the most, like on the deepest levels, on multiple deep levels for this medicine, for what it can do, what it can bring about, right? And
I love
not
you.
everybody has that purity in
right.
their, you know, in anything, actually.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I fear, but I am excited at the same time that we also start to see decriminalized policy that's being developed, or legalized policy that's being developed. You know, obviously Oakland, obviously Denver, Europe. There are a few countries in Europe that are looking at it. Czechoslovakia is doing some stuff with it. Uruguay,
They have been decrim
right?
for a very long time, and they actually have the best, in my personal opinion, they have the best decrim model in the world. They're
Yeah,
better.
when I say
Everybody always
doing
references
something with it,
Portugal, but Portugal's isn't as good as Czechoslovakia. So,
yeah,
or
and
the
I
Republic,
think
actually.
you know, Uruguay, but I mean, when I say doing some stuff with it, there are a number of Czechoslovakian companies who are like in the biomed space who are looking
Yeah.
at doing stuff with it.
And
So
we have some of that going on here in the United States too, which
yeah, we do, and we also start to see stock speculation. So I'm seeing startup, you know, over-the-counter stocks around psilocybin research, and that's how you know, like, it's really starting to go corporate, is when it starts being traded around like that.
Yeah,
I don't
and
like that part. Demetri, what do you have to say about that?
it's an important topic, you know, like it's something that I think is going to either really upset a lot of people or make a lot of people really happy, you know, like
I hope it's a positive, but I'm not.
I think that like that corporatizing these types of medicines, specifically plant medicines, plant-based medicines that are psychedelic or entheogens, you know, you're gonna ruffle a lot of feathers within indigenous communities. You're gonna piss off a lot of people, and
Yeah.
they're gonna stand very firmly and strongly for what they believe in. And this is going to be you know, a catalyst that is going to bring about specific change within our communities. And this is it's literally going to precipitate both experiences, and depending upon how we polarize, shall we say, within the moment, is what we're going to align with, you know. And like we live in a dualistic universe in a sense, right? Like there is duality here in this experience, and so there's going to be both sides of the coin, and people are going to experience both of them based upon their polarization.
Yeah.
And literally I really honestly feel that these like, you know, big corporate entities and giants that want to throw just massive capital at biomed research, they can be good or they could be bad. But I think in the long shot of things, like it's going to really come down to like what you mentioned, Mendy, is a purity of heart. And the reasons is for why people are doing and furthering this research in the fields that they are.
Yeah.
There was a woman a few months ago who tried to patent psilocybin, and she actually got the patent on the word psilocybin. She obtained the actual physical patent.
What the hell?
But yeah, literally.
How did that happen,
It's
Demetri?
not Holy Earth. How could you imagine that the United States Patent Office would grant something like that?
Well,
But this is
as
just
soon as you brought in the United States Patent Office, it's like, well,
it's a woman that like she's from California, and like I think that she has good intentions. Like we had our own conversations, and I think that she
she's a
has,
friend of yours?
well, not, I wouldn't say friend, we're acquainted.
Oh, jeez.
You know, but like you
Demetri's
know,
buddy's trying to patent psilocybin. No,
she-
I like that.
just, you know, I think she said that she wanted to be able to keep it out of harm's way, you know. And this is the thing, is that if big corporate entities get a hold of such patents, there's going to be a lot of things that change in that field. And you know, we could experience everything from, you know, like 1984 type, you know, like constraints to the most futuristic, you know, growth and evolutionary standpoints that we've ever seen, just depending on how these medicines are, you know, implicated and brought in
Right.
and introduced back into society.
Quite literally, like if it's weaponized, it could be something like 1984, where psilocybin's used as a control versus
I don't
the medicine.
itself would allow it. Like the
Right, no, but
psilocybin isn't
if
allow
you
it.
trust the medicine, then you realize like anybody who's exposed to psilocybin, whether it's inadvertent or purposeful, like it has its own effect. It's very enlightening, right? So like
I mean,
maybe it doesn't control,
also
maybe it does
cortisol.
create this mega future, you know, of amazing things.
Yeah, like I mean, they're like, I think psychedelics in their very basis are boundary dissolving. What they do is they assist us with recognizing where our boundaries are and either dissolving them or reinforcing them based upon an actual recognition of what our personal truth is. And like, there's no hiding from yourself on psychedelics. There is, I mean, and if you do, you're encountering massive resistance. You're encountering, you know, your own psyche in such a way that it could pose to be, you know, a struggle with the self. And this is why it's important, you know, in some instances to have a guide or have a facilitator to be able to fully let go and allow yourself to go through the process. You know, there are people out there that will, you know, sound the klaxon call all day about being able to do these medicines by themselves individually, and there is nothing wrong with that. But there are some people out there that don't have the capacity to hold space for themselves, and that's where the facilitators come in. And
or they may not know what they're signing up for, because it's important to let people know, like, psychedelics, as much as I love them and as wonderful as they can be, they also are nothing to fuck around with. Like, I have had a friend of mine took Jesus Christ Superstar LSD. He stabbed himself in the stomach. He is fine, but he has a scar that literally goes from the top of his abdomen all the way down. He almost died. I've seen some real interesting shit and some really crazy shit and some very dangerous shit.
Well, there's I think
the responsible use is absolutely so important. Knowing what you could, drug set and setting, super important. Knowing whether you should be with somebody, and you also should not you should not partake in psychedelics with people that their energy doesn't feel good to you. You know,
So
that's even worse.
Here's something that I kind of look at. So with what I would say lighter doses or lighter psychedelics, it's you know, short period. I feel very comfortable to journey by myself. If I'm going to leave my body for, you know, 4, 6, 8 hours, I would like to have somebody, you know, making sure that my body's cool and taken care of. Or I've got to be outside and familiar with my setting enough to know that I can walk through all of those things and still have some control here, right?
Absolutely.
But if you're going to do the hero's dose, oftentimes I'm out of body. And at that point,
most people, hero's dose, you need to, like, I mean, I don't know, unless you're able to put yourself and trust yourself enough to know that you're not going to wander out into the streets, you know, but this is important, you know, like people who have a history of mental illness in their family should probably never do psychedelics, you know, but to some extent, you know, on the flip side of that coin, tribal, you know, shamans would be construed as being schizophrenics. You know, and so, you know, being able to understand the relationship that we create with ourselves based around these substances, probably one of the most critical aspects of understanding psychedelics. It's like, it can be heaven or it can be hell, like in every single aspect. And like I mentioned before, like there is no such thing as a bad trip. There is only shit that you're not willing to accept about yourself. And people who struggle with mental illness, it's not that they're uncurable. It's not that they are, you know, like lepers or whatever, quote unquote, in that sense or stigma. It's that they maybe lacked or didn't receive the education that they needed to be able to process their emotions properly. And in some cases, these medicines teach us how to understand our emotions. And they confront us with the hard truths of our own reality. And that is, you know, by being able to face our demons. There's a saying that I like and that I enjoy, is that the light and the dark have a love affair. Give them to each other, right? Allow them to liberate themselves from one another. And that looks like just being the witness and being the constant observer and honoring the process of your own body and your own emotions and being able to see you for you. And, you know, to those listeners that are, you know, saying that I will only do psychedelics by myself, or I struggle with mental illness or something like that, and I'm looking at psychedelics to try to assist me, there is hope for you. There are help. There is the ability to have these medicines in assistance with you, but it is something that I feel that should be directed or help, like you should have someone hold space for you. Go and seek out a reputable shaman or taita from South America, or, you know, people who are licensed clinical therapists and practitioners, LCSWs, people who actually understand the clinical psychology and social work that is behind these psychological paradigm shifts that happen and are happening so often in our communities currently in this moment, because of the massive changes that are happening economically, you know, just in general amongst our communities here on the globe, you know. And so there are so many avenues for help for people who struggle with addiction or mental health, especially with psychedelics. There are so many uses and versatile actions that these medicines can be put into practical use with, and it's just something that I think is generally needing to be opened up more as a broadened topic. And there are so many people like James Fadiman and you know, Parth from Scepter who are doing and leading this work in a clinical psychology social setting of understanding what's happening on a neurochemical basis, and being able to actually study the process so that we have the hard science and the hard facts to be able to create policy change that is lasting, that isn't, you know, back and forth, or that we have to struggle with, because I feel that these are crucial, you know, tools for our societies to be able to find balance and harmonize within themselves.
Yeah. And on that note, actually, we're about out of time. And so, and I feel like that's a really good place to like go ahead and stop for this episode. But plus,
Can I
I
give
just
one
also
little
want to say,
disclaimer before you go? There are
I'm gonna give
some
a disclaimer too.
Yeah, I think there are some mental health conditions that also have physiological conditions associated with them.
Absolutely.
We
I
know
just wanna
that
be
for
clear
sure.
that, yeah, so I just want to be clear that, you know, we recognize that there are some things, but you're right. There are a lot of mental health conditions that I think can possibly be addressed with these compounds. So
They could probably be assisted.
yeah.
So as the only
Mindy,
licensed
you have the
therapist in
final
the
on that.
podcast, I'm going to end with this disclaimer.
Yeah.
If you are somebody who struggles with mental illness, do not take it upon yourself to go seeking psychedelics, even with a shaman. I don't care how experienced they are. They're not a doctor. Do not go off your medications. Do not go seeking some help thinking that you're going to cure bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder. It's not going to cure any of those things. And there's some of those illnesses, some severe and persistent mental illnesses do require medication for the rest of your life because they are an organic disorder and they're not going away with any kind of psychedelic. Psychedelics can assist in things. That's why we have psychedelic assisted therapies. But please do not, especially if you're somebody who struggles with mental illness, do not go taking things into your own hands and ingest substances when you don't, especially if you don't know how you're going to react to them. Psychedelics can be incredibly therapeutic. They're very promising and they're very wonderful. And they also can be very damaging. They can be dangerous. And we have to take those things into account all of the time. I always want to promote safe use if you're using it all. And please, for the love of God, do not try to treat mental illness yourself. That's like the single biggest thing I could ever say, because so many people try to do it. So many people are like, oh, well, if you do this or if you do that. And these are people who know nothing about mental illness. And so please don't do any of those things. So on that note, though, oh my gosh, Demetri, I know I get crazy because so many people, like, these are people that I treat. These are people that, you know, and man, I hear people say some shit that I'm like, if you say that one more fucking time to somebody who's schizophrenic, I'll knock you the fuck out.
Yeah.
You know, because like these are their lives, you know what I mean? And like crazy things can happen.
Yeah.
But Demetri, I'm so grateful that you came and joined us today. And I can't wait to have you back again. I know Justin can't wait to have you back again because you guys have so much deeper stuff to talk about. But I'm so grateful that we could kind of get this beginning taste into psychedelics and we could start having this conversation and talk about, you know, both the pros and the cons to psychedelics and what they can do for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think being non-biased and in the middle of everything, being able to observe the good and the bad is a very healthy place. And
Yeah.
I echo 100% everything that you've just said. And, it's something that I'm honored to be here. Like I feel very grateful to be able to share these conversations with you guys. And I am excited to be able to continue them in further discussions and maybe be a witness to some of your other podcasts. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, everyone, say goodbye to our friend Demetri Vallejos. Say goodbye to our dashing co-host Justin Areola. And until next time, stay mad, my friends.
Love you guys. Ciao.
Peace.